Welcome to the Catbird Quilts. I'm Kathy Martin, and in today's video, I want to share with you what I think is the perfect size quilt for a college dorm or a twin size bed. And I have a lot to say about it, so stay with me. So I recently made a nap quilt, which I adore. It's the Comfort Quilt by Sharon Holland, and it is on the twin size mattress that you see before you. And I love it. I absolutely love it. I use it a lot on our couch, which is normally in this spot. Recently, it's been a holiday and I had the time to take a long, comfortable nap in the bed. And I put my nap quilt on our bed and noticed it wasn't quite long enough. And that made me think, what would be the perfect size quilt for one person for a bed? And so I polled my children, who both have twin size beds and have both gone to college. I actually have made a twin size quilt for my older daughter. It was her graduation quilt to take with her to college. And I was dismayed when I found out she wasn't really using it. I don't want to be that mama that's like, you better use that quilt that I made. But I was surprised because I expected her to use it. And she had more than one actual opinion about it. And we can say complaint. She was not complaining. So she's actually huge heart of gratitude, loves her quilt. But the first was, it's not very soft. And that was a great lesson to me about teaching or sharing with the recipients of quilts. Please wash this and dry it. It will soften up the more you use it and the more you wash it. But her bigger complaint was that it was too big. And I was shocked because I was like, I pretty much followed the size of a twin sized quilt. So there are varying sizes out there. Different people have different recommendations, but it's usually anywhere from 72 inches wide to 80 or even 90 inches long. I got to thinking about that. I'm like, what do you mean too big? So I've done some thinking, asking, talking, lots of thinking. And I did a little research too. Turns out a regular twin size bed is 38 inches across, twin size mattress. And it's a regular size twin mattress is 75 inches long. And I measured this twin mattress before we put it on our dining room table here where our couch used to be. And it is in fact 38 inches wide. And this one is a little bit short of 75 inches. What you sometimes find in college dorms though, is the extra long twin. So a twin XL. And it is 80 inches long. And I'm assuming that's because you've got these big strapping boys playing athletics and tall girls like my girls, and they need that extra little length to really be comfortable in their college dorm. And so I just couldn't understand why it was too big. But if you think about it, college dorm rooms are made up of usually twin size beds, and very often, in order to maximize the space in the room, the college student, i.e. both of my daughters, will shove their bed up against a wall, just like this. And we don't actually even have it all the way up against the wall, but very often they're trying to get as much floor space as possible. And very often they'll put their bed on risers so they can maximize the space in the room and kind of reclaim the space under the bed. That's kind of thing number one. The bed is pushed up against the wall and sometimes up. And then thing number two is, at least in my experience, and I had my children poll their friends, there's not a lot of bed making happening. There's not a lot of laundry happening. And if you are a college student mama or a college student grandmama and you see what they bring home for the holiday, you know that's true. And thing number three is they don't often use a top sheet. I don't know. I was raised with top sheets. I can't imagine sleeping without a top sheet. But apparently, after my children polled all of their friends and coworkers and even friends online, it is a very small percentage of them, my older daughter being one of them, that uses a top sheet. So that's a lot of things to accomplish potentially in one quilt. So let me get out the quilt that I made her and show you what I mean. But before I do that, I want you to take a look at, this is my nap quilt on the twin size bed. And you can see at the end, it doesn't cover all of the mattress. So it goes just a little bit down. You can imagine if my body or anyone else's body was underneath, that's going to pull that up even further. So you have your head. This is Patrick, my friend slash viewer slash patron slash Instagram follower. Tav made this out of a men's shirt, by the way. So this is your head. Your shoulder is at least that high. So it comes up like this, right? And lifts up, and then whole body, and then feet at the end. So suddenly now it might cover your feet, but it definitely is not going over and under, and it's definitely not hanging over the edge of the mattress. Is he not the cutest? This is what I feel like in the bed. So if you want something that's actually going to carry the length of the mattress, this nap quilt, I call it a nap quilt. It's all linen. I love it. It is 64 by 72. It's plenty long for my height, but it's not plenty long for my bed. And so now let me show you the graduation quilt. Okay, so this is the graduation quilt that I made for my older daughter, now on the bed. You can see that it hangs over the end beautifully. And it is, I think it is 66 by 84. Might be a little bit short of that. So the thought there is that it's plenty wide and plenty long for this twin size bed. But you may notice already there is a ton hanging over this side. And because a twin size bed is 38 inches, if your quilt, which again, most of the recommendations that I've seen for a twin size bed quilt is 72 by 90 or 72 by 80. Usually it's somewhere between 80 and 90. 72 is usually the base. That's also the size of a twin size sheet. So if you get out a twin sheet and measure it, it's usually 72 by 90. And so it would make sense then that that's what you would do for the quilt. The problem is if it's only 38 inches wide and the bed is shoved up against the wall, that leaves 30 some odd inches. This one is not 72 wide, hanging over the edge. Maybe your college student sleeps like someone in the city morgue, and maybe if you're lucky, they're not like me, and I turn and turn and turn to everything turn. And what happens is the more that's hanging off of the mattress, the more it pulls. And so before you know it, half or more or all of the quilt is off on the floor because there's almost as much hanging off as there is actually on the mattress itself. Not to mention if they're doing that thing where they have claimed all the space under the bed, this is now blocking the weight. Now, as a mama, I think that's fantastic because it will cover up all of the mess that's underneath the bed. But I don't know a lot of college students that are actually trying to make their bed and or hide what's underneath. That's just not, in my experience, even as a college student 30 years ago, it's just not the priority. It's just not what you're thinking about. And so you can see with that much hanging off the end and this much hanging off the front, it's kind of a pain to put on the bed and keep it any semblance of square. And in fact, when we stopped to put this quilt on this mattress, Paul stopped from being behind the camera and helped me do it because it was a lot of straightening. And I mean, I don't want to do it right now, and I'm making a video about it. So I really don't see a college student spending that time and energy. That 72 wide, though it may be the width of a top sheet, it really isn't super functional. And in fact, and this was to her point of it's too big, it's bulky and cumbersome and does not make it easy to use on the bed. So if this is too big and the other one was too small, what exactly would be the right size? I want to show you one other example that you might think would be perfect and just isn't. So I've talked about the length and how 72 inches is not quite long enough, even for a regular size twin bed, but definitely not for a twin XL, which is often what's in dorms. And I've talked about how the big twin graduation quilt was way too wide. I wanted to talk to you about this little guy. This was my very first quilt. It's made almost totally with shirts and just some random stuff that was in my craft bin. It is considered just a throw. Like, there was no designation, small throw, large throw. It is 52 by 68. And so obviously we know it's too short, but what I want you to see is it's far more fitting from a width-wise, and it's just barely hanging over the back. But if we go back and put a body under here, like it covers the mattress right now, but as soon as you put a body under there, it pulls up and suddenly it's not wide enough, which was the reason why I wanted to create the nap quilt to begin with, because I would lay down on the couch with this. Besides not being long enough, I would have it over me, draped over my body, and I would turn and I would get a air gap back here. Cannot have the air gap when you're napping, nor can you have the air gap when you're sleeping. And so even though it's far more fitted for the width of the bed, it's that situation. You put somebody's body in here and they turn over, and now there's actually not quite enough to cover the width of the bed. Definitely looks better, but isn't quite wide enough. So here's my hypothesis. This is where I have arrived. This is 52 inches, which is not quite wide enough. A full-size bed is 53 by 75. A full XL is 53 by 80. So if you're making your college student or family member or whatever, someone that's going to be in a twin-size bed right now a quilt, this might actually be okay. But if you want that quilt to grow with them, they may not always be in a twin-size bed. They may be in a full-size bed before long. And my nap quilt is 64 inches. It's wide enough to cover the surface of a full-size bed with a little bit of overhang. Now, not a lot, in all fairness. Here's the perfect size in my opinion. It needs to be bigger than 56, so you get that 53 of the future full-size bed, perhaps, and you get enough to protect you from the air gap, up to 64 inches, give or take, because that gives you enough to cover the whole width plus the depth of your body and a little bit of overhang, but not so much overhang that you're having that struggle or that there's so much hanging off the bed that the weight of it wants to pull off of the bed. And then you need at least 72 inches, but really 75 or more, so that it's the whole length of the bed, which of course you're not going to put the quilt all the way to this end, but that extra covers your feet and a little bit over the edge of the bed or totally over the edge of the bed. It's a range. It's really a range. So 58 to 64 wide and 75 to 80 and some change long. The other thing that that does is it gives a very clear which side is the short side and which side is the long side. In my nap quilt, as much as I love it, sometimes if I've brought it to the couch and then take it back to the bed or vice versa, I have to count the blocks to figure out which side is the short side. So it's 8 blocks wide and 9 blocks long, but it's so close when I just pick it up. I'm like, which side is the short side again? When you've made a, let's pick a number right in the middle of that 58 to 64 range. So 60 by 80, there's no question. You've got a good 20 inches difference. You can just see it in a shot. And so it's really just as simple as going and throwing it down. That way you get all of the length and all of the width without having so much width that it just feels big and heavy and cumbersome. So what does that mean? That means if you do a block-based quilt, very much like my nap quilt, you can add blocks width-wise and lengthwise to get really just a pretty close approximation to that nice width and length. And unless your blocks are 17, 18 inches or more, you can really just add as needed. And the smaller your blocks are, obviously you can just do multiples until you get to that point. 8-inch blocks are great. 9, 12, and 14 work beautifully. So if you're looking for a pattern to make your college student or high school graduate or just somebody that you love that has a twin-size bed, using a block-based quilt pattern really puts things in your favor, so that way you're not bound to the dimensions that are presented in the quilt pattern. To that point, there are a couple of patterns that, well, actually 3 or 4 that I know of, and plenty more out there. But Penelope Handmade has a wonderful quilt pattern. It's actually 4 patterns in one called the Heritage series. And the one that I used for my eldest daughter's graduation quilt is the Scrappy Triangle quilt pattern, and it is great. She has a courthouse steps that works. There's one that's really a variation on an Irish chain. Those are great. Lo and behold, Stitchery has one called Celtic Crossing, which is just perfect to add blocks to add or subtract to get the length and width that you want. Obviously, the Comfort Quilt by Sharon Holland, it is amazing because you can just add as many blocks as you'd like, and they're very simple. And so it's just blocks with snowball corners on as many corners as you want, and it comes together quickly. So here we are in the beginning of July. A lot of you can turn a quilt around pretty quick for your future college student. It's a great one, and you can just do as few or as many blocks as you'd like to get that extra long twin mattress to cut down on the width so that it's just not too big. Because really, when it comes down to it, we all want our college students and our high school graduates and our family and friends that have twin beds to use the quilt. It's why we make the quilts to begin with. And lastly, to that thing where college students don't use a top sheet, and because I am a thrifty quilter, a quilty thrifter or a thrifty quilter, it is a wonderful thing to put a sheet as your backing on your college student's quilt, because if they don't use a top sheet, it's a nice, smooth, backing, that's going to be what's up against them. And they wash up beautifully, and it's very easy to cut them to size. So, and they're usually widely available at the thrift store. I found 4 just this week when I was at the thrift store many times. You don't have to put your really expensive, fancy designer fabrics on the back, because it's not going to get washed as often as we would like. It is going to get wadded up and thrown around. And if there's a sheet on the back, it can be laundered and washed and dried easily and well. And as is the case with a lot of my quilts, when you use recycled materials or upcycle shirts, for example, it just is already soft. It already feels broken in. And anytime we give someone a quilt that's already soft, you know it's going to get used and loved and worn. And you can feel like your time and energy and love was put into something that will be used and loved in return. So I hope that was helpful. I hope that you agree with me. I hope I've convinced you that the perfect size college dorm or twin size bed quilt is 58 to 64 inches wide and 72 to 80 inches long. And I hope your quilt recipients love it as much as you enjoy making it. I'm Kathy Martin. This is the Catbird Quilts. Thank you so much for watching.